Well, good morning, everybody. Jeff DeVerter here, Chief Technology Evangelist at Rackspace Technology. So glad that you've chosen to join in with us today here. Everyone, it is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, our first broadcast during the month of October. Now, Cybersecurity Awareness Month, if you're not familiar with it, is an event that was started here in the U.S. back in 2004. And its intent was to be a collaborative effort between the U.S. government and industry to help make sure that everyone has the resources that they need to be safer and more secure online. And I feel like the National Cybersecurity Month maybe should be every day because I don't think we take it quite seriously enough, this whole cybersecurity thing. One of those reasons, I think, also is simply because it's so daunting and can be so scary. Now, my guest that's going to come on here in a little bit has made a career of helping do just that and help companies be safer. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Everyone, I'm so glad, again, that you've chosen to be a part of our stream here this morning. Feel free, comment down below. I'm going to say Umesh is here. Glad to see that. Somebody's in from Dubai. Yes, sir. Glad that you are here as well. If you guys have questions about cybersecurity or thoughts that you want to add into it, just post them down below. Either myself or my guest, Matt Soseman, is going to be here. Judy, you are right. We need to be concerned about cybersecurity. And it's not always the biggest and hardest things that you have to do to be safe. Sometimes, as Matt will tell you, it's just the blocking and tackling. Ooh, we've got someone in from Singapore. So glad that you're here. South Africa. I am so glad that you are here. And I think you might be the first person who's joined in from South Africa. So thanks so much for being here today and for introducing yourselves. Everyone, follow the example of our good friends who are doing that. Now, I mentioned already that we've got a great guest today. The guest is Matt Soseman. Matt is a security architect over at Microsoft, and he's going to be sharing with us here very shortly. But first, what we will do is dig into the things that we always do, and that is we start with This Week in Cloud. And in This Week in Cloud, we talk about how the cloud is making the news and why it matters to you. And from there, we'll move on to cloud releases and what is new from the cloud providers themselves. Now, it starts today in the news as the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has awarded a pretty significant contract over to Peraton. Now, Peraton's a service provider that provides services to in the public sector, and this is a pretty significant one. This is a $2.7 billion contract. If you ever wondered if there's big bucks to be had in cloud, let this single contract be evidence to that. Now, this contract is intended for Peraton to help move the Department of Homeland Security here in the U.S. out into the cloud. Now, they're calling it their hybrid computing environment, HCE, which tells me there's going to be some variation of private clouds and public clouds here. They didn't really get into that. The main point is that Peraton is moving the U.S. Department of Homeland Security out into the cloud. And it's a contract that lasts for about 10 years. And it's not just like so many of them are, that first step of lift and shift out into the cloud, but written into it was their transformation then into more of a cloud native environment. And their lesson to be learned here is the fact that they've taken a holistic view to this in making that multi-step effort, that multi-step of not just moving, but transforming. I think Matt's going to have something to share about that here in a little bit as well. Is the fact that as they interviewed 2,000 individuals across the US and the UK, is that people aren't doing the basic stuff. And that's why there's so much risk involved here. And that's the lesson to be learned so much here, I think, across National Cybersecurity Awareness Month is, guys, patch your devices, get an inventory of what you have running, understand and do the basic stuff that is going to help protect you. Now, when Matt was, I got to know Matt here recently when he was on the latest episode of Cloud Talk. Yes, it is shameless self-promotion time. But this in the Cloud Talk episode, Matt came on and we talked about things that people can be doing to help them be more secure online. So if you haven't subscribed to Cloud Talk, now what time better than now to head over to wherever you find podcasts and subscribe to Cloud Talk. All right, so let's move on now to what's new from the cloud providers. Now, AWS has a new release in their Cloud Control API. And this Cloud Control API really ultimately allows system administrators to have greater granular control of their cloud infrastructure and being able to manipulate and control it programmatically from their environment. Now, this is important because more and more we want to be able to do this stuff in an automated fashion, in a program-controlled fashion, so that we're ultimately able to have greater consistency and speed and, yes, security in these environments. So that's a big help from AWS. Also from AWS is Amazon Connect, has in preview high volume communication capabilities. So this could be calls, could be texts, could be any number of emails as well. And this is ultimately geared towards call centers who are trying to, at volume, connect out to the people that they need to reach out to. So thanks to Daniel for posting all of these links here in the chat across LinkedIn. If you're watching across another platform, we will have the links all updated here shortly. You can always go back to rackspace.com/solve to get more information on any of these. All right, let's move over to Azure. Azure has several updates for their NetApp services. First of all, in public preview, NetApp file backup capability. So now natively being able to back up into Azure NetApp files to provide a fully managed backup solution for long-term recovery, archive, and compliance. But also from NetApp is their files data stores for Azure VMware solutions are coming soon. Now, this provides NFS data stores in Azure NetApp files. So NetApp has been in the news a fair amount here lately over at Azure as they deepen their native capabilities utilizing the Azure or the NetApp capabilities in native Azure tool sets. So that's pretty exciting. Now, also from Azure, an update here is VMware HCX is now GA for their VMware solutions. And this is pretty cool. So HCX is the primary migration solution for organizations moving their VMware workloads natively to a cloud service like Azure VMware Solutions. Now, HCX Enterprise Edition is now generally available. Of course, it was available in preview before, but now you can run all of your enterprise workloads, your transformations out into Azure. All right, a couple of updates over on the Google side. Anthos saw some security bulletins. Apparently, there is a vulnerability that has been discovered inside of Kubernetes, which is allowing a redirection of some of their controls. So do some patching if you can. Highly recommend that. BigQuery saw a big update. How clever. So BigQuery services now as an interactive SQL translator, as well as a batch SQL translator as well. All about making it easier to get your database content from wherever it's running, ideally coming out of your data center and out into the cloud. So GCP helping you along the way there. All right. So with that, I think it is actually time that we bring in my now good friend, Matt Soseman. Yes, let's bring Matt up. So Matt is a security architect over at Microsoft. He's been working in IT for probably longer than he's going to admit to any of us, and has done what I like to say is also most any of the jobs that we've all done in IT, but centered in and around security. So Matt, welcome to Solve Live.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, you and I got to know each other recently when I had you on the Cloud Talk podcast. Great conversation. Everyone, that podcast comes out this week. So make sure you're either going over to rackspace.com/solve to find that, or wherever you find your podcasts. So Matt, what's the current job over at Microsoft? How are you helping the world in the cyber world and cyberspace?
Yeah. So thanks again for having me. So I'm a senior security architect at Microsoft. I'm in our partner division. So I work with Microsoft partners, managed service providers, systems integrators, and the like. I help them build security practices. I help them enhance their existing security practices and ultimately help secure our joint customers through our partners. So train them and help them build solution offers and that sort of thing. So it's a lot of fun, and there's always so much to learn. So that's kind of my
Well,
current role at Microsoft.
got it. And so I love the fact that Microsoft and the other providers will do this as well, but the fact that they focus so much and put so much effort around helping partners build offerings. Because what you guys do is build these great tools, but these tools ultimately need to be implemented. So either we need individual businesses to implement them, but ideally with partners to bring whatever their secret sauce in and around what you guys create in tooling. So that's a pretty fascinating role, I would think, of how do you marry those two things together.
Yeah, it's interesting because Microsoft definitely brings the technology to the table, but
Mm-hmm.
we need somebody who has the business expertise, understands the customer's environment, understands the whole digital transformation journey to be able to make it real for that customer and help them align to their business goals. So, Microsoft partner married with the Microsoft technology, it's a match made in heaven.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Peter, welcome from Uganda. I think you've been in once or twice before. It's always fun to have somebody in from Uganda. Incredible. And everyone else, introduce yourself below, but also be thinking about security questions you might have for Matt as well as we go through this conversation. Now, Matt, as I mentioned before, security wasn't your first role in IT. Why don't you quickly just take us a little bit through your IT history?
Yeah, sure. Been in my career for a little over 20 years now, and I started off as a systems administrator at a very small business, about 150 users,
Mm.
a few branch locations, running all their IT systems. That was a ton of fun. From there, went over to Sprint and helped on their unified communications team. I worked in the network operations center as well. Did a lot of other stuff at Sprint. Went over to BlackBerry after that, working with some of the largest organizations at the time that were using BlackBerry, and then made my way over to Microsoft about 10 years ago. And so worked in our consulting services division out there deploying these products for customers. So I've been kind of all over the map in my career, but
Yeah.
again, it's I'm constantly learning. Security and even IT was vastly different when I first started, in the early 2000s, and now it's totally different game. But yeah, I've had a lot of fun doing it and a nice journey along the way.
Fantastic. So what drew you into security as where you've kind of centered your career at this point, and
Yeah,
obviously in the Microsoft space. But what specifically around security drew you in?
yeah. What I enjoy about security is that, and kind of like IT, it's always changing. There's always something new. Threats continuously evolve. The threats we had a year ago, even 2 years ago before the pandemic, vastly changed now, right? And so things are always moving, and so it requires you to keep up to date on your skills, keep up to date on your knowledge, and I kind of like that, right?
Yeah.
I like not having a groundhog day of a career, and I like learning and just doing new things, and so that's what drew me in was just the awe of just security and being prepared. And as I got more into it, I'm like, wow, this is incredible. There's all these different kind of sub tracks in a cybersecurity career that you can go down.
That's right.
And so that got me really interested as well. But yeah, I love to learn, and I love to understand just kind of that threat landscape, and obviously how do we protect ourselves.
Yeah, it does make it interesting.
Yeah.
We've got some more folks who've joined us. Vicky from Indy and Michael from down in Houston. So glad you guys have joined. Hey, question for the audience: on a scale of 1 to 10, how deep do you think your understanding of what's happening in the cybersecurity space these days? So 10, you're a genius. 1, you can spell it. So go ahead and comment down below and let us know kind of where you are. So Matt, as you look at the tooling that Microsoft brings to the table, as you implement it, in your own life, but then also talk to partners and customers at points, what are some of the areas that you find that some of that low hanging fruit that companies really should be doing right now that they aren't?
Yeah. Yeah, there's kind of three things I think about. Now, I'll preface this with, I don't know what I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. None of us don't know what we don't know, right? There's always new things to learn and understand in cybersecurity. But when you think about the basics and how to protect the organization and protect the environment, the first thing I usually go to, and just through experience has been passwords and patching.
Mm,
And so when I think about that, I think about the user's identity. What are some of the basic things we could do to protect their identity, protect it from, if it gets phished, as an example. And there's some obvious things that come to mind around multi-factor authentication, 2FA, two-factor authentication, whether it's a text message, although yes, those can be rather insecure, but it's
mm,
something better than nothing.
right.
Or doing a push notification from an authenticator app like the Microsoft Authenticator app. So being able to protect that user's credentials with that second form of authentication. If you're ready to go passwordless, obviously there's technology from Microsoft to help you do that as well. But I think about that second factor, but I also think about complex passwords. I mentioned I was an IT administrator at a really small company years ago when I first started my career, and that was a different time. But people had written passwords down on Post-it notes and
Yeah.
used their kid's birthday and whatever other ways to remember. And so, I think about complex passwords, and I think about how do you make that password longer, a little bit more complex, and put some rules in place. So that's kind of my thought process around passwords. Second factor, and then obviously make it complex. But the other side of it is around patching. When you look at the data breach reports that
Yeah.
Microsoft puts out, Verizon, IBM, a number of those companies out there in the industry, most of the time the root cause of those data breaches was there was some sort of vulnerability somewhere, whether it's in an operating system or it's in a router or switch or wherever, that was exploited, right?
Right.
And maybe it was a 0-day where no patch existed, or maybe it's something that was known. And so I think about patching and having a plan in place for how often do you patch, how do you test those patches, all of that matters.
Yeah.
And when you read those data breach reports, you start to think about, well, wow, had only they patched that known vulnerability, we could have been reading a very different article. And so passwords and patching is kind of that first thing I think about as those basics. Um, and then from there, I kind of go on to a few other things, but I'll pause there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It, as a company like Rackspace, it's our job we help companies move out and transform to utilize cloud-based technologies, be it public or private. And the first part of that, of course, is discovery and understanding what the customer's got running. And it still surprises me how many operating systems which aren't supported anymore are still running in production
Yeah.
without a true appreciation for the honeypot that is. I mean, it's just a swimming sea of vulnerability and opportunity for the bad guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, when we talk about the basics, we're not talking about buying, expensive technology just to have expensive technology. I talk
Right.
about passwords and patching, but, to your point about outdated operating systems, having a plan in place to go through and understand, okay, that application is running on server 2008. Let's understand why. But let's
Yeah.
also understand, why does the business need that application? Is there an alternative out there that's maybe SaaS based? That's kind of a common thing with a lot of Microsoft partners I work with. They're out there consulting with their clients, and they recognize that the customer is running this very old, 2008, maybe even 2012 server that's running some kind of line of business app. So then they go out and they understand, okay, is there a SaaS equivalent that's located in the cloud? And that obviously helps to mitigate that risk. But having a plan in place for, okay, it doesn't support any newer operating system, so what's our plan to get off that app or mitigate that?
Yeah.
And same thing with client devices, Windows XP, Windows 7, obviously. And if you're running Linux or whatever it may be, just understanding the end of life of those OSs and what's my plan to get off of those and onto something that's modern that I can easily patch and secure. So that definitely falls into, the category of basics
Yeah.
is understanding the OSs and the environment and how to mitigate any vulnerabilities.
Well, and I think the next way really to talk about is we just spent the past several minutes talking about the basics, the things that you should be doing. Patch your
Mhm.
devices, be it client devices, even down to your mobile devices, and then just get them up to the most current versions. Because quite oftentimes every one of those patches has some aspect of a security vulnerability that they're addressing in there. Now, that being said, also the level of sophistication that's happening on the bad guys side of the house is staggering, and that's why it gets so important to look to your providers to help with these things. Now, when you and I talked in that Cloud Talk episode, by the way, yes, you too can go download that episode. You talked about the amount of work that's at Security Graph, the amount of intelligence that you guys are capturing that gets fed into every one of your applications. Maybe you can talk about that for a second, because
Yeah.
the number that you mentioned on that in that episode, 1 trillion different signals a day, I believe was the number you said.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll actually add 7 to that. So 8 trillion signals a day. And what's interesting about it is, we call it the intelligence security graph.
yeah.
And so it's a collection of signals coming from various Microsoft security products, but also our partner ecosystem and the signals they're feeding us, along with our digital crimes unit and our cyber defense operations center and all of our people assets, if you
Hmm.
will. And so there's about 8 trillion signals a day that Microsoft is processing, and using things like machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to understand those signals, and then in real time be able to push updates out to maybe Defender antivirus on a client, or
Yeah.
pushing out updates to Office 3 or Defender for Office 365 to safe links and safe attachments. But also our partners are able to, and even our customers can actually um, almost mine that data through the APIs of that
Mm.
security graph. And so you can create dashboards, you can create reports, show trends in the environment over time, be able to kind of spot that needle in the haystack because of all of these signals that are coming in. It's really rich data. And I think I mentioned in the podcast, cybersecurity these days, again, it's different than it was 20 years ago. These days, we have all of this data available to us. It's almost a data science problem than it is anything else. And being able to understand the data that's in front of you and visualize it and get those insights out of it. And same goes for the basics, right? Passwords and patching. If I have the data and the reports on the patch level of all of my devices in the environment, again, understanding that, getting the insights out of it, and then forming an action plan, it's all about the data.
Yeah.
And so the security graph is one of those sources of that, in addition to whatever else might be in your environment.
Right. I asked the question earlier of people to post in kind of where they were in their understanding of cybersecurity. We had kind of across the board some folks who were higher up, closer to 10, a lot of middle of the road folks, and some in the middle. Of course, there was Kent, who was minus 100, but at least he knows his skill set. And we know Kent, so don't think I'm just being mean to somebody. All right. So, but with that, I think that what I'm really trying to draw out here is there's basic stuff that you can do. The patching and passwords, the blocking and tackling we can also talk about. Second to that, then, is because the threat is so large and because so much of it is happening dynamically throughout, moment by moment, day by day, looking at your cloud partner as, we use the phrase trusted partner. Boy, you're really trusting a lot in this case when you talk about that. And so I think it's incredibly important as we think about, there's still folks who are the holdouts saying, you know what? It's my data center. I have the keys to that door. I can lock it up nice and tight. We're safer. But when you think about the threat that's there, I mean, Matt, what keeps you up at night when you think about the threats? If you weren't
Yeah.
hiding, I don't say hiding, being protected under the Microsoft umbrella.
Yeah. What keeps me up at night? I mean, obviously things like ransomware, but what really keeps me up at night is the simple stuff like people's identities getting compromised, right?
Yeah.
It's that individual at that company clicking on the link in the email,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing's 100% secure, and so maybe whatever email phishing solutions you have in place might fail at that point. But clicking on that link and getting their corporate identity, their credentials phished.
Yeah.
It's that kind of stuff that keeps me up at night. It's also using VPNs
Hmm.
and the vulnerability and the attack surface that's exposed with a VPN. If I compromise your VPN, and we've seen this in some data breach reports recently, if I compromise the VPN, I get full access to all of your infrastructure and your entire network.
Yeah.
And so what keeps me up at night is kind of the basics, whether it's network segmentation, whether it's identity hygiene, whether it's patching, but also what I tend to think about a lot, and Pink, you posted in the chat window here, distributed access using role-based access. I also think about all of the global administrators for Office 365 that an organization may have, or domain admins for
Yeah.
Windows Server Active Directory, being able to almost take away those admin rights and give out role-based access, but then have some kind of a privileged access management solution in place so that I only give you permissions when you need it and I revoke it once you're done. And so again, just kind of thinking about the basics, that could do a lot. But that's what keeps me up at night, because there's a lot of organizations that don't do that, right? They invest their time and money in expensive solutions, but it's also about accomplishing that hygiene that we talked about as well.
Yeah, and that's it's this, and what I think about are those areas that you haven't thought about. Where is the area that we're being probed and being
Yep.
tested that we're not aware of? And that's when it
Yeah,
gets down to what is your remediation plan?
absolutely.
And because you got to assume it's going to happen at some point.
Absolutely. And so, if I'm operating entirely on premises, that's one type of remediation plan. The other type of remediation plan might be if I have a hybrid topology, or if I'm all in on the cloud.
Yeah.
If I'm all in the cloud or have a hybrid topology, it's understanding that shared responsibility model. What's that cloud service provider responsible for? What am I responsible for? Just because my data is in the cloud does not mean that organization completely manages everything. There's a responsibility on my part as the customer. But my incident response plan might be a little different. But what's important is have a plan. And so when that day does come, here's my 5 steps, my 10 steps, my 1,000 steps, and I'm going to perform, and making sure all the stakeholders understand that plan, and so it can be exercised. And I've helped a lot of our partners help their clients create
Mhm.
an incident response plan, and sometimes it could be as simple as a one pager that has some bullet points, or it can be a complex 100-page document. But what's important though is you have a plan. It's not a matter of if but when that incident happens. You want to be able to respond to it and know exactly kind of what to do. Who are you going to contact? Is there any other vendors you need to bring into the mix?
Yeah.
If you do have data in the cloud, what's the escalation process, that cloud solution provider? All of those things start to matter. And then obviously, how do you contain it and all those things? And usually the suggestions I like to give are, you build a plan, but
Yep.
get some help building that plan, right? Bring in someone who has the expertise, whether it's a consulting firm or an individual consultant, or someone that has the expertise of incident response, to make sure you have your bases covered, and making sure that that plan is robust and complete, but also understand it's never going to be complete. And so continuously reevaluating it. I mentioned before, threats evolve. And the threats we had before the pandemic are now vastly different. And so that means our incident response plan needs to evolve. So, I kind of said at the beginning of the show, there's 3 things I think about. That third thing is absolutely the incident response plan,
Yeah.
and being able to take action, when it matters. And again, it could be a one page with some bullet points, maybe an email, or it can be a 100-page document.
Yeah.
But you have a plan and you stick to it.
We've got an episode coming up in the next week or so. I'm not sure what the release date is, but it's definitely October. But where we go through, we brought the CISO for Rackspace and a few of her key folks to talk about how they run tabletop exercises. So taking that incident response plan and putting it to the test in a fictitious environment. And that it's a great episode, and how they go about and test and modify and mature their plan outside of an actual real attack.
Yeah, one last comment, and I saw Judy's post here in the chat window. Something I've done, and this was a few years ago, but I created an incident response plan for my personal accounts
Ooh.
out there on the internet. So what if my bank account gets hacked, or what if my cell phone, the SIM card gets swapped, or whatever, right? What's my kind of 5-10 step process? Obviously call the bank and freeze my credit reports and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes if you think about it as, what would you do if your personal accounts got hacked?
Yeah.
That might help you understand, okay, how do I now change the scope to my corporate and the organization I work for if they get hacked? But that might be a great starting point. Start with your personal, and then from there, I think you'll get some ideas on how to implement that plan at work.
Yeah, it's great advice. And even if you don't live inside of the IT part of the world that handles security, you can at least start to ask questions of those folks once you've done that personally. I think that's great advice. Great advice. Well, Matt, thank you so much for being on the program here this morning. You're West Coast, so you got up early for us, and we appreciate that. And it's a great episode, folks. It will be released either this afternoon or tomorrow morning over at rackspace.com/solve. Also, anywhere you find podcasts. Now, Matt, you are not a stranger to the social world here. You've got a very successful YouTube channel. How do people find you there?
Yeah, sure. So just youtube.com/Matt Soseman. You'll find my channel where I talk about security and do a lot of demos of Microsoft products. That's a lot of fun. Also, I'm on Twitter @SosemanMatt. And then if you like, follow me on LinkedIn as well. So those 3 places is my home on the web.
That's fantastic. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for being a part of our time here this morning. As you know, these events happen every Tuesday and Thursday at 8:30 Central Time. My name is Jeff DeVerter. I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist here at Rackspace Technology. And our goal here is just to help you make smarter decisions with tech. So if we can help with that in any way, let us know. If you just want to learn more, head over to rackspace.com/solve. There are no salespeople there, just great information. All right, folks, have a great day. We'll see you on Thursday.